Hey everybody, Rob here at Trailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster high-power diode wiring kit on our 2013 Jeep Wrangler. Now, if you want to tow your Jeep behind your motorhome, you're going to need to have your lights, because when we're going down the road, just like when you're pulling a trailer, we need to be safe and let all the other drivers around us know what's going on. And whether that's we're driving at night, we need to have our taillights on, or we need to change lanes on the highway, we want to make sure those signals are getting to the back of the Jeep, because that's going to be the furthest point back. And you can see the lights on our Jeep are matching what's going on in our motorhome, and you can also see we didn't have to change any of the outward appearance of our Jeep, because we do have the option of using those magnetic lights, but then the Jeep's top here is not metal, so we'd have to find somewhere to mount them, either on the side or on the bumper somewhere, and then we'd have to run the wire up to the front of the Jeep to the back of the motorhome. Well, that's just a whole lot of process that we're going to have to do, and then we're going to have to do that every time we want to tow our Jeep. And then once we get there, we'd have to take them down and find somewhere to put them. But with our diodes, it's going to be a one-time installation, and there's no other setup afterwards. On top of that, our diodes are going to help protect our Jeep as well, because if there was a problem that happens on the motorhome end, the diodes are going to prevent it feeding back into the electrical system, saving the Jeep's wiring. Now, the kit's also going to come with a plug to mount on the front of your Jeep and the cord to connect everything up. We'll get a 6-way on the front of our Jeep, and we can plug in. It'll provide us all those signals: our left turn, right turn, brake signals, and our tail lights. Then the cord itself is going to be a straight cord. That way, if you have a tow bar that has channels in it, it'll prevent the cord from dragging, because it'll run through the arms, going back to the motorhome and plugging into the 7-way. Now, the cord itself is going to be 6.5 feet long, so that'll be plenty of room to get it hooked up with your tow bar and everything else, and still have that room to make turns. But again, since we have it going through the channels on our tow bar, we don't have to worry about the cables dragging. So our diode kit is going to come with everything we need to get it installed: 4 diodes, about 30 feet of 4-pole wire, and all the connectors as well as the cord on the front. Now, some customers may be a little bit nervous because we are going to be required to tap into our vehicle's electrical system, but we'll go through and show you what we're looking for, how to test each function of each wire. That way you can have the confidence to do it at home. In fact, let's go and do that now. To begin our installation, we want to find where we're going to be mounting our electrical socket on the front of our Jeep. Ours has 2 prongs that we're going to mount up, so you want to make sure you leave yourself a good amount of wires so that we have room to wire everything up, and we're not trying to work right here. So a few inches at the front, and then we want to start routing that 4-pole wire towards the back, towards the taillights. Now, we set ours underneath the skid plate, and if we come back, we can see where it followed towards the driver's side frame rail. Now, we got a lot going on right here. We got our steering and a lot of suspension components. So I followed this factory wire, actually went over the support brace, following it along, went over the steering shaft and the front axle, and I zip tying it in place as I go. Once I got to about here, right where the exhaust is, I actually sent it to the outside of the frame, but you can see I actually just ran it on top of the frame to stay away from the exhaust as far as I can, zip tying it to these existing lines. Now I just kept following it back, going along the top of that frame, securing it along the way. Once I got to about the rear body mount here, right by the muffler and the rear axle, I came to the inside of the frame, went over the suspension, went over the rear axle and everything else, and then I shot it out right by the muffler to the outside of the frame, and that's where I have the rest of my wiring at. Now you can see we still have a good amount of wiring here, but what we want to do is we want to separate each wire so we have 4 individual ones. So we're just going to take a pair of cutters and just cut in between each wire, start pulling them apart as high as we can go to the last anchor point, so we have 4 separate wires. Whenever you're cutting them, you just want to be careful not to cut the wires themselves. Just want to try to go right in between. Then we can just grab the end of the wire and start pulling them apart, working our way as high as we can go for each one of those wires until we have 4 separate ones. Now we'll let you know it is going to take a little bit of time, so just have some patience. Make sure you separate all the wires. At this point, we need to get our taillights out, so we want to remove the screws that are holding it in place. So we can grab a Phillips bit or a Phillips screwdriver and remove the 2 screws on the inside of the taillight here. Once you have those removed, we can grab the taillight. Just be able to just gently pull on it a little bit. We want to make sure we grab all the connectors and make sure everything's loose and we're not pulling on wires too hard. Now there's probably going to be 2 connectors in there. They can be connected to some wire clamps on there, but we don't need to have our taillight connected in order to test everything. So we're just going to push in on that tab right here on the top of the connector. And that should give us enough, get the tension off so we can release it. We'll disconnect the other plug as well. Another tab on top. And if you're having trouble squeezing it, sometimes it helps you get a flat blade screwdriver and push on it while you're pulling on the connector. And once you have both connectors loosened up, it might still be connected to the Jeep. So you can take that screwdriver, trim panel tool, whatever you have available, and we're going to pop those clips out of that connector so we can set the taillight aside and not have to worry about it getting damaged. Just little push pin fasteners, just pry them out, and we can set the taillight aside and remove the other side as well. Now if we look at the opening on the driver's side of our taillight, if you look in there, you can actually see the ground or some light showing from underneath. Well, that's a good thing because we need to get a couple of our wires up to this pocket here. We want to grab our yellow wire and our brown wire. And it honestly might be easiest if we just come down to the bottom, find the ends of our brown and yellow wire, kind of separate it between the rest of our green and white wires, and then we can just reach in through the taillight opening and grab the wire. Make it a lot easier since we have such a large opening and we can get to everything right there. So I'm going to start passing my wires up. Actually reach in, grab the ends of them. I'm going to pull all the slack through. And when you're pulling your slack through, fortunately again, it's right here at the back. We can see pretty well. You're going to want to check underneath. You can actually see really well from the wheel well here. You want to make sure all the slack's pulled up into the taillight pocket and we don't have a wad of wire that could potentially get caught going down the road. Again, like I said, right here is really easy to see the frame rail, get the wire, and make sure that there's no potential problems later on. So at this point, we've got our taillight signal on. You can see that my license plate light is on, and we need to test our circuits to see which wire is corresponding with our taillight signal. So I have my circuit tester, but one thing we did figure out before you get too far into testing, that plug that was attached to the taillight on the driver's side, we need to plug that connector back in. It doesn't need to be attached to the taillight, but we need it to be connected because if you follow the wires, it actually wires off at the taillight connector itself, and we won't get any power if it's not connected. But we have our taillight signal on and everything else is off so we can isolate it. Now I'm going to take my tester and go through and test each one of these pins. So if we're looking at our connector and we have that large square tab on top, it's going to be on the top center pin. And if we go to the back, we can see it's going to be a white wire with an orange stripe on it, and that's going to be our taillight signal. Now we need to write that down or remember that, and then we're going to test the passenger side and verify the location and color of wires as well. Now at this point you want to turn your taillights off. You can see that my tag lights are out, and we want to test for our brake circuit. So you may need an extra set of hands, have them push on the brake pedal, or you can wedge something in there making sure that it's on and being depressed. But we'll go through and test each one of those pins again and see which one is going to be our brake signal. So it looks like we're getting voltage off of the top right pin if you're looking at the plug with the square on top. And if we flip our wires over, It's going to be right next to our taillight wire, and it's going to be the white wire with the green stripe. Now again, we'll do the same thing on the other side, verifying the location and color of wire. So on the passenger side, our wire locations are going to be in the same place, but they are going to be different colors. So our brake wire is still going to be on the end position on the top right, except this time on the passenger side, it's going to be a white wire with a yellow stripe. Then our taillight wire is still going to be in the middle on the top, except it's going to be a white wire with a purple stripe. So I went ahead and pulled the loom back so we can get better access to the wires, have a little bit more room. We're going to start with our brake wire. If you remember on the driver's side, it should be that green and white wire. I want to come downstream from the plug itself a few inches, but also make sure you still have enough room on the back end that you're not trying to work inside the Jeep there. But we're going to cut that wire in half, and we're going to strip back both ends of it. Now we want to grab one of our diodes that has all blue connectors on it. We want two of those, doesn't matter which one. Just want to pull them off, and we're going to crimp them onto the end of our wire. Make sure you get all the copper strands in there. I like to twist it up, make sure it goes in there, then we can crimp it down. We're going to grab our diode, remove the last blue terminal. Want to hold on to it, but if we look at our diode, you'll see that we're going to have two terminals on the inside and one on the out. The out terminal is going to be going closest to the plug, so we'll take that wire, we're going to plug it in there, and then the other end of our wire will just go onto one of the in terminal plugs. It really doesn't matter which one. We just want to make sure that the end that's going farthest from the taillight plug is going in, and the one closest to the plug is going in the out. Then we'll take our yellow wire, estimate about how much we need to reach the diode itself. Again, I like to give myself a little bit of extra just for slack purposes. We'll cut the excess off, strip back the end. We'll crimp it on our last blue spade terminal. And that's just going to connect directly to the last terminal on our diode. So our brake or turn signal diode should look like this once we have it hooked up. Having our taillight signal go through the diode, but also have that secondary source going out to our taillight. Now for our taillight wire, we're going to do almost the same thing. We're going to cut the taillight wire in half, strip back both ends. Except this time when we grab the diode, we want to make sure we grab the diode that has the yellow spade terminal on it. We're not going to use it just yet. We want to take both the blue ones, and we're going to crimp them onto each end of that white wire with the orange stripe. And just like the other one, we'll remove that last spade terminal. Make sure the one furthest from the plug goes into one of the ends. One closest to the plug goes into the out terminal. And we're going to take our brown wire. Again, estimate about how much we need. Give yourself a little bit of extra. Cut the wire in half. Except this time, you want to hold on to the excess wire here. We're going to strip back both ends, then coming from the bottom of the Jeep and the excess, and we're going to combine them together. And that's the whole reason for this yellow spade connector, because it's going to be really difficult to get two wires into the blue spade terminal, so they give you this bigger one so we can get both wires inside and crimp them down. And once we have that one crimped in place, just like the other one, plug it into another in terminal on our diode. The excess wire we're going to send down back to the bottom of our Jeep so it can meet up with our green wire, route over to the passenger side and hook up over there. Just keep in mind it's going to hook up exactly the same, except our yellow wire is going to be replaced with the green one, and our brown wire is going to be a single wire going into the diodes. So I took my green wire and my brown wire both, and I started running them towards the passenger side. There's not a whole lot of things to tie it to back here, so I tied it to the existing trailer wiring that's back here. And then I took a couple of zip ties, that way I could wrap around the bumper beam and keep the wire from touching the muffler. And then I have both wires coming down just on the outside of the frame right here. Now in order to get it into the inside on the passenger side, I actually found this plastic cover here and I drilled a hole through it because there is no access point over here on the passenger side. So I drilled a hole just big enough so that I can get my wires through. Now there is some insulation in there, so you may not be able to see daylight, but if you take a drill bit and go through, you should be able to push your wires through that insulation or any kind of foam that's up there, go back up top and pull the rest of the slack through. Now again, you want to make sure you pull all that slack up. If you look inside, you can kind of see that foam insulation and how my wire's just going right through it. Again, just a rather small drill bit, just big enough to fit your wires through. Drill through the plastic, and then poke your wires up, you can grab the bundle. But we're going to hook up these wires the same way we did as the other side. Have our brake wire, which I'll hook our green wire up to, and then we have our taillight wire, which we'll hook our brown wire up to. Just want to make sure you give yourself enough slack to work with the wires, and you're not trying to cut it too far back and try to put the diode too far in the Jeep where you can't really get access to it. Once you have everything connected, you do have the option of either taking your diodes, there's some double-sided tape, you can stick them together, you can stick them to the inside of the Jeep. However, since we have to have room for our taillights to be plugged back in and to be removed in case we ever need to access them, I don't like to put these inside stationary. I like to leave a little bit of slack. So I just like to stick them together. I'll take the backing tape off. And then just stick the two diodes together. Then we can always come back with some electrical tape, put the loom back in place, kind of tidy up any wires inside here, and put our taillights back. With everything hooked up, go ahead and plug our taillights back in. And put that other connector back on the taillight. You don't really have to, but I would suggest doing it just because it was there to begin with, and it will prevent it from rattling around, making so much noise when we're driving down the road. Just kind of push all of our diodes and connectors, make sure they all get behind the taillight and they're not going to get damaged. Put our taillight in place. Almost replace the two screws to put everything back in. So we should have one more wire left underneath our Jeep, and that's going to be the white wire. Now this is going to be our ground wire, so we either need to find an existing ground somewhere or use the self-tapping screw and go directly into either some sheet metal or the frame. Now that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get a 5/16 nut driver and the self-tapping screw, and I'm going to come right to this side piece of the frame here right behind my rear tire, and I'm going to get a hole started, and then I'll trim my wire and get everything going. But I want to get that hole started in the frame first. Once I have it started, I'm going to remove the screw so I don't strip it out. Figure out about how much wire I'm going to need. Cut off the excess. Strip back the end of my wire. We want to grab the small ring terminal out of the kit, crimp it onto the end of our wire. We'll take the screw. And this time go through the ring terminal and make sure it's nice and secure going into the frame. But when you're tightening this down, double check, make sure that ring terminal doesn't move and that screw itself is not stripped out. So with everything on the back ready, we can wire up the plug on the front. And we need to separate our wires again, but nowhere near as much as we did in the back. We just want a few inches to work with up front. And again, just try to come in between those wires. If you miss, it's not the end of the world, because we can always trim the wire, strip back the end of it. Just make sure you have enough to access each individual wire separately, maybe a couple inches or so. And we have them all separated. We're going to strip back the end of each one of our wires. Now we want to grab our plug. On the back, we're going to have this rubber cover or a boot. We're going to pull that off. Grab all of our wires. Make sure you put the wire in the small end of the boot. I'm just going to slide it over. Just got to push it out of the way for now. But if we bring our attention to the back of the plug, each one of these terminals is going to be labeled. So if we start at the 12 o'clock position and go counterclockwise, the top one is going to be labeled TM for trailer marker. That's going to be our brown wire. The next one is going to be GD for ground. That'll be our white wire. The next one will be LT for left turn, yellow wire. Finally, the one on the bottom here will be RT for right turn, and that's going to be our green wire. Now for future reference, the next one going around is going to be labeled S. That's going to be your electric brake signal. And the center is going to be your auxiliary power source. Just in case you were wondering, because there is 2 different industry standards, and in case you're running a charge line, you want to make sure you hook it up to the correct pin. We want to grab a super small Phillips screwdriver now. And you'll see we have really small set screws on here. So we'll loosen them up, but do not take them all the way out, because they're extremely easy to lose. We can just loosen them up, make sure we got enough room for our copper wire. Make sure you get all the strands together. And we'll just put the corresponding wire into the terminal. And I like to leave just a little bit of copper at the top, that we don't have to worry about the insulation tampering with the connection inside. And we'll just tighten it up, make sure it's not going to come out, and just keep working our way around until all the wires are hooked up. Once it's all hooked up, take our boot back, make sure it goes over the back of our plug. And what I like to do, not only to help secure the boot, but also help protect the wires, kind of hide the colors as well, is I like to wrap the boot and as much of the wire as I can with some electrical tape before I mount it up. Just kind of hides everything, gives a cleaner look, but also protects everything a little bit. Especially at the back of the boot right here, it is a large opening. Really don't want anything getting inside of there, so if we can tape it up, it'll definitely help prevent any kind of corrosion or dirt debris from getting inside those connectors. And once I have it taped up as far as I can go, I'm just going to move my plug to where it meets up with the mounting bracket. Then I'll take a couple self-tapping screws that came with my base plate and use those to secure it to the bracket. We can get our tow bar ready now. Now we have channels in ours, so we want to go ahead and utilize those. And that's also why we have the straight cable here. Now you'll notice that one end is just going to have these blunt cut wires on them, and that's because the connector that's going to go to our Jeep is not going to fit through the channel. So you want to make sure that you run it through the channel on your tow bar before you wire it up. We'll just find the blunt cut end, and we'll start on the end that has the shaft on it, and we're going to start feeding our cables through until it comes out the other side of our tow bar. You just kind of want to watch as you're pushing them through, make sure those wires don't come up through the channels like they're trying to here. You can just push them down with your finger, make sure they go all the way through. And once you have your wiring all the way through, we can grab the other end of the plug. Now there's going to be 2 screws on here, a really small one towards the front of the plug and somewhat of a larger one towards the back. We need to loosen those up. So you want to grab yourself a pretty small Phillips head screwdriver, and we'll loosen up the one at the back. You don't want to take this one out, you just want to loosen it up. Because if we look on the back side, it's going to have this little gate here. And that's really just to keep the wires from getting pulled out, but we need to loosen it up so that we can have some room to get the wires in there in the first place. Now the small screw towards the front, we are going to have to pull it out all the way, but you want to be extremely careful not to lose it, because as you can see, it's very small. We're going to pay attention to that, and we'll pull the front part of the plug out. Grab the silver part of our plug, make sure that gate's open on there. We're going to pass all of our wires through, and for now we're just going to push it back out of the way so we have plenty of room to work with all these wires up front. Now if we look at the back of our terminal, each one of these is going to be labeled, but they are going to be a little bit hard to see once you start unscrewing the terminals. If we find a reference point to go off of, we'll go off of that set screw right here. And the first terminal we have is going to be labeled R for right turn. That's going to be our green wire. Then if we go in a counterclockwise motion, the next one is going to be L for left turn. That's going to be our yellow wire. Then we're going to have G for ground. That's our white wire. And finally we'll have T for taillight. That's going to be our brown wire. Now there is a couple more wires in the cord itself. This one around the edge is going to be labeled S. That's going to be the blue wire. And then the center pin here is going to be our auxiliary power source. That's going to be the black wire. So we just want to undo the terminals on here, find the appropriate wire, and then attach it to it. But whenever we unscrew the set screw, you don't want to take it out because these are really small too, and we don't want to lose them. So we have the right turn signal terminal loose right now, so we'll grab our green wire. Make sure that all the wire gets inside, and I try to leave just a little bit of the metal sticking out just so I don't have to worry about the insulation causing any contact issues. Then we'll just tighten up the set screw, make sure the wire's nice and secure, and we'll just go around hooking up the rest of the wires until they're all in there. And once you have all your wires hooked up, we're going to take the silver part of our plug, slide it back over, make sure we line it up with the screw hole, and we'll take our screw, very carefully just get it at least set in place, grab our screwdriver and tighten it down. And on the back here where that gate is, we want to tighten this screw down to where it kind of squeezes the insulation on the cable there just a little bit, and that's going to prevent, whenever we do pull, it'll prevent the cable from pulling the connectors out because it'll stop the pressure right here. Now we don't need to smash the cable, we just want a little bit of tension, just snug it up. Now the final step of our installation is going to be to test our wires and make sure all the circuits are working properly. Now I have my Jeep hooked up to a circuit tester, and you can use your motorhome, but if you do, you want to isolate any kind of problems if anything does arise so you can verify if it's on the Jeep or the motorhome side. But if I turn on my tester, we can see that the taillight function is working, the left turn signal, my brake lights, and my right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. With all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at eTrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster high-powered diode wiring kit on our 2013 Jeep Wrangler.